evening, everyone. Hello and welcome. My name is McKaylee. I work with Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us as a part of our virtual community here tonight. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. We would not be here for the last year or the last 50 without you, because that's right, it is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary, which is a huge deal for a bookstore. And we're very excited to be celebrating that in 2021. But first and foremost, thank you. We're so excited to be celebrating Liz Climo's new book, which is wonderful. But before we get started with that, I want to go over just a couple of quick housekeeping things for you. First and foremost, before I continue, closed captioning is enabled for those who might want it or need it on this video. There's a black bar down at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. If you click on that button, closed captioning is enabled if you want it or need it. Also, for those of you who might be joining us outside of Colorado, Tattered Cover Bookstore is a local independent bookstore in the Denver metro area. We have 4 locations currently, soon to be 5, which is amazing. We're opening up our children's location in Stanley Marketplace in Aurora, and that's going to be sometime over the summer. And right now, one of our locations is mid-move. And so we're going to be opening that up. Our McGregor Square location, which is from our Lodo location, is moving to McGregor Square sometime late May, early June. Yes, very soon. But we're excited for that. And you can come visit our other 3 stores. As long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, you can come shop and browse for about 90 minutes or so. But if you're like me and want to keep shopping from your pajamas, or you're not able to visit us in the Denver metro area, you can shop online at tatteredcover.com for all of your bookish needs. Also on tatteredcover.com is all of our events that we have coming up. And oh my gosh, we have so many. We have over 25 events in May, which is an incredible feat. And we're so excited to be celebrating an amazing array of books. Like tomorrow, we have The Girl in His Shadow by Aubrey Blake is another one. We have great events up and coming. So check out our calendar at tatteredcover.com/event. And now I'm just so excited to introduce our author and guest tonight. We have Liz Climo in conversation with Nick Cho. And so just a little bit about these two. Nick Cho started on TikTok in late 2019 and started posting videos that he would be known as your Korean dad in April of 2020. His audience has been growing rapidly ever since. Nick has 2 teenage daughters named Madeline and Penelope, and you can find him at yourkoreandad.com. And then Liz Climo is a cartoonist, children's book author, illustrator, and animator. She grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area and moved to Los Angeles after college to work as a character artist on The Simpsons. She's the author of Rory the Dinosaur series, The Little World of Liz Climo, Lobster is the Best Medicine, Please Don't Eat Me, and Best Bear Ever. Her books have been translated into 10 languages and have sold millions of copies worldwide. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband and daughter. And we're here tonight celebrating the release of Your Dad. So it's my very pleasure to welcome both Liz and Nick to our event here tonight. So we're going to switch over and unmute them here. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank
Wonderful.
you so much.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Well, I am very excited to hear you two converse about this book. It's amazing and so wonderful, just perfect for all kinds of families. And I want to remind our viewers that there's a chat on the screen that you're watching, a chat next to the screen you're watching us on, where you can ask all of your questions in the Q&A later in this segment. But for now, Nick and Liz, take it away.
Thanks, McKaylee. Thanks so much. Liz, this is so fun. I'm so glad we get to spend time together like this.
I am too, and I'm so happy that you agreed to do this. I'm so happy to be talking to you right now.
Oh, come on. I mean, yeah, let's just spend the next 30 minutes just fan personing. Is that
I like you more. they're gonna love it. People love that.
Yeah. So congratulations. Book's out as of yesterday, right?
Yes, I'm like, was it? Yes, it was yesterday. That's
yes,
right.
more important than Star Wars Day is Your Dad Day. Henceforth, shall always be known as Liz Climo, Your Dad Day. Congratulations. Let's talk about dads. Let's talk about moms. You know, when I read this book, the thing that stuck out right away was just reading the introduction. And at the time, I had realized, to be honest, that you had written your mom first. And so then as soon as I got to the end, then I had to go and get your mom. It was really, I think, really important to just to kind of get like a full sort of picture, because, there's a lot that I think we're going to be talking about today and through the book. I know that you've done a really great job of being super inclusive in the way that you've portrayed a lot of things. At the same time, there is this sort of like gender binary and kind of binary of like the mom and dad kind of duality that we're going to talk about. And I mean, I guess it's sort of hard to avoid, because as with so many things when we're trying to be inclusive, we want to talk about the things and then not be excluding. But so then we have two books, which is really great. I guess let's start with this. Can you tell us about your dad?
Yeah, like my dad personally, or the book Your Dad?
Your dad personally, like, I
Okay,
guess
yeah.
to start out with, and then a little bit about maybe how it informed the book.
Absolutely. So my dad is a very sweet, gentle, but like not super outgoing like dad, and he never really was when I was growing up. That was really my mom's role. And my mom she passed away when I was 23, and so I wasn't as close with my dad while my mom was alive. But then after my mom passed away, we've become closer and closer and closer. But yeah, he's a really, like, to give you an idea of the kind of person he is, like he's very kind of got like this just like very quiet stoicism. But then like my brother's actually visiting him right now, and he sent me a picture from within his house of my dog that had passed away like 3 years ago. He has like 3 little pictures of her in a frame in his house. And it's so surprising, because you wouldn't think that he would do that. But then it's not surprising, because it's exactly the sort of way he always tends to surprise me, just by just this quiet sweetness, I guess. So
Yeah. People ask me about my dad a lot.
yeah.
Being the sort of your Korean, I have this thing. I never talk about it, but like anytime I say the phrase "your Korean dad," I feel this obligation to do the little that intro thing. It's kind of funny, but yeah, you'll notice that in my videos, if people have seen them, that every time I say "your Korean dad," I'll kind of just do it just as a reflex.
I think
But
people have seen them.
people.
Definitely.
Yeah, but people ask about my dad a lot, and it's really interesting because it's funny. Every time people ask, I'm a little bit surprised. And of course, it makes total sense, but in so many ways, I think that your book, the book Your Dad, as well as like our fathers, it's such an interesting relationship between the two. In a lot of ways, you're talking about your dad and you're talking about the book, and I want to also hear a little bit about your husband and what kind of dad he is as well. But I know that for myself too, there's a big difference between the dad that I have and the dad that I kind of portray, I guess, in my Your Korean Dad videos. And in so many ways, the response has been that it's a little bit like, I guess I didn't intend this, but I kind of end up sort of filling this kind of fantasy dad kind of role.
Yeah.
And in the sort of the dad that people wish they had, or
Sure.
a lot of times it reminds people of the dad that they do have or did have, and a lot of times people have that kind of loss as well.
Sure.
But getting right into the book, it's it's a certain type of book, obviously, with all your illustrations, and it's funny because when I'm flipping through it, I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm reading. There's copy, there's words that I'm reading, but I'm spending much more time kind of like just gazing at the illustrations and thinking about them and reflecting and just feeling a lot of feelings as well. So I guess to sort of take a step back, I know that again it started with the Your Mom book. Can you talk about the sort of full story? And now we have like kind of this 2-book series of sorts, and kind of how you thought about it, where the inspiration came from.
Definitely. So like I said, my mom, I was very close with my mom. She passed away when I was in my early 20s, and it was devastating. And I felt like I'd always sort of had this book somewhere in the back of my mind. And I actually like remember one night I was falling asleep, and it just was like, it's hard to explain, but it was like, hey, you have to write this book. And I just wrote down your mom. It honestly started as like a, hey, wouldn't it be funny if it was like a your mom joke? But it's like, obviously it's you are mom because I'm 12 apparently. But so I wrote that down as kind of like the, you know, joke. And then I started to write it. I actually wrote the entire book in the morning at Found Coffee in Eagle Rock. I would go to Found Coffee and I would sit and I would write. Back when I was actually going into coffee shops, that's where I would usually write. It's a great place to write.
I love Found Coffee.
Love Found Coffee. Love Annie. And so I just wrote it. Like it just kind of poured out of me. And I think because, so I sort of wrote it from the point of view of a new mom. My daughter was she was probably like 3 or 4 at the time. Mm-hmm. But then also as a child, like if you've read the book, it sort of starts at like the beginning of like having a child and then like growing older and then like losing a parent. And so it was very much informed by my experience as both a new mom and also a child. And it was supernatural. It was very natural. It was not supernatural. But then, so when it came time to do your dad, it was more like, I knew I wanted to do a book for dads as well. But then I immediately felt sort of like, well, you already wrote this book about being a parent, basically. That to me, this is a book about being a parent. You've already written one. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's called Your Mom because it's about my mom, but it's meant for any parent. And now I have your dad. And so it's like, well, what's the difference between a mom and a dad? Is there a different, what about people who don't have a dad in their family? And like, again, it's gendered. And so it kind of was, I felt like I backed myself into a corner with like, well, now you're doing this very sort of like, in a way, kind of like antiquated view on like a family. And so with this book, I had already kind of said a lot in this book about being a parent, but I wanted to say more in this book, but then also just sort of talk about the different ways you can be a parent or be a dad specifically that aren't just like the traditional trope of like, this is what a dad does. So that's kind of where it came from. I think they both work well alone, but they're nice to have together because I think they say slightly different things. But that's sort of how it came about.
Yeah, both books definitely made me cry.
Oh.
Or both around 2/3 of the way in. I'm not going to give away what made me cry. You have to get the book to find out for folks who are watching this. But it, like I said, and this was so kind of poignant about the two of us talking about this topic about dads and about celebrating your book, is that in so many ways, that idea that you've shared just now of, ooh, dads, like it makes total sense. It's obvious. Moms, time for dads. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, what can you say about dads? And realizing that in many ways, it's actually not you, it's our culture in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, it's about dads are ourselves, right? Being a dad myself, that in so many ways, when you look at even the pop culture portrayals of dads on TV shows and such and movies, that in a lot of ways, the way that our culture tells these stories, it's really more about them being men than about being a dad.
Sure.
And in a lot of ways, like when we talk about things like, what is it, the Bechdel test or things like that, where it's like, in what ways is this content, gender balanced in a way that actually like tells a story of someone who's not sort of like a male protagonist, that those things exist because of the way that we talk about men in our culture. And in a lot of ways, like the journey, the hero's journey, the sort of adventure, ends up sort of overshadowing the dad part, like the fatherhood. And that in so many ways, like you through your book, me through my content, it's sort of like exploring that jungle of what fatherhood means. And in many ways, you kind of stumble upon stuff, that maybe you didn't really expect. So with that, like, what are the things maybe about the dad book and maybe about your mom as well that maybe surprised you as you were writing it? Things that maybe, sometimes we do this, right? Like when we're writing something that like this idea comes in and it just kind of comes to you through the process. And it maybe wouldn't have been one that would have come to you otherwise. Is there anything like that about moms or dads?
I guess it sort of was just like a personal experience for me because I found with your mom, it was so natural. And, you know, I am a mom and I had this very close relationship with my mom, but with your dad, it was like, I just, it was more, I don't want to say that it was harder to write, because I'm also proud of this book. It was just more like, I felt like I learned more along the way about myself, and just,
Mhm.
I find that I'm often afraid of making mistakes. And I found while I was writing this book that, like, if I ever were to make a mistake and it was in print, like, I'm always open to learning from it. And so rather than like being afraid of saying anything, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna write this book about my dad and about my husband and these dads that I know, and about friends of mine who do not have a close relationship with their dad, or do not have two parents, or either parent that's a dad. And I'm just gonna write a book for them, and hopefully I'll do all those people justice. And if I make any mistakes, I'm gonna like be open to just like putting myself out there, making mistakes, and hopefully learning from them forever, because that's all we can do.
All we can do, most definitely. Will you, again, I don't know if I should say read or show, like, will you share a part of your book with us?
Absolutely. So I have a part marked here. This is kind of in the middle, so hopefully you can see this okay. So we're going to start here with a narwhal, and playing with this little baby narwhal, throwing rings on the horn or the tusk. So sure, it might not look the way you thought. And we've got a cat here, and it's wearing a shirt that says "Real Cool Dad."
I can like do
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
you.
And the cat's saying, "Ready to go?" And the kid's saying, "Oh my God, Dad, you can't wear that because it's a dorky shirt." Or maybe it's even better than you expected. We've got two otters. Both of them have #1 dad shirts on. Only the one on the right has also the #1 dad shirt.
So cute.
Maybe you have a partner. Two pigs say, "Little piglet, wake up, wake up, wake up." Your turn. Or the help of family and friends. Or maybe it's just the two of you.
Focus. Come on. There we go.
There we go. You might be a working dad. Morning boss. Or maybe your work is in the home. Morning boss.
Pancakes.
Pancakes. Maybe you've been with him since the beginning. Got a little egg cracking there. Or met later on. And there's a little seal showing a bigger seal. That's me. That's a little baby seal picture.
So great.
Maybe you're following in your own dad's footsteps. Or forging your own path. No matter how you got here, there's someone who looks up to you now. So try not to mess it up. It's a little tongue in cheek, but that's the part I wanted to show. And then it goes on.
Yeah, so great. I mean, this, for me, like, there's so much there. This idea of like, maybe you've been with him since the beginning or met later on, that we've talked about this before, that there is that idea of a father figure.
Mhm.
You know, it's interesting, right? Because you hear that phrase father figure a lot. You don't hear mother figure that often, you know, not nearly as often anyway. And that has a lot to do with just the experience that folks have in family units and such, right? You know, there is a little bit of biology involved. You know, the mom is usually there for sure. And the dad tends to be, it tends to be very much a function of his choices.
Yeah.
His choices and his choices alone. You know, and it's interesting, yeah, that most things in family, it's like you define family almost by, it's not a choice, it's a thing that is, when you're talking about like a certain kind of biological family. But then when you're talking about the actual family that you live with, that defines your life,
Mm-hmm.
that it really is a function of choices. And that way, like that, you know, you follow up with, like, maybe you're following in your dad's footsteps, or maybe you're forging your own path. You know, that's so profound. That's so profound for men and dads and father figures, that idea of what kind of dad am I going to be? And that in so many ways, you know, it's 2021 now. You know, we watch shows like Mad Men and, you know, stuff from the 50s and 60s. and seeing like, the ways that at the times, like doctors actually advise people like, don't hug your kids. Don't hug them. It's going to mess them up. Like literally don't hug them. And now, of course, it's kind of the opposite. It's like, don't stop hugging them in a way, in so many ways. But that, that's so much of fatherhood isn't even just the act of taking care of your kids, but it's trying to figure all these things out
Sure.
and being confused. And in a lot of ways, with gender roles changing and evolving and progressing the ways that they have and should, that, there hasn't really been that kind of corresponding conversation necessarily about like what men need to do and what fathers need to do. It's something that we still need to do. And again, in a lot of ways, I feel like you touch upon so much of that here in the book, as well as like it's a lot of what I hear folks tell me about my content that really touches them. A lot of it's not even very explicit. It's not what I say. It's that I'm saying it at all, and that I'm giving attention in the way that I do. It's really been a journey for me, as I know that this book and like all the things that you're doing have for you. I asked Liz to prepare a photo of her parents so that we can both share and just kind of tell the story of the picture, or just a little bit about what that photo kind of makes you think about. Can you share yours?
Yeah. So I've got a picture from my mom and dad's wedding here. They were very young. I think they were probably about 24, 25 in this photo. So here they are. My mom is sticking her tongue out at my dad. My dad's looking very stoic and probably like, we're taking a picture. Why are you sticking your tongue out? But this is them. This is them to a T. This is exactly what they were like, and how I remember her, and how he still is. You can tell, it's kind of hard to tell, but he's got like just the slightest like grin. Like he doesn't look annoyed. He looks kind of like, which is just very sweet. It's very him.
And it's a wedding picture, so there's people around. So
yes.
Yeah. Kind of that. So I'll share my parents. This is on my phone. So is this
yeah,
showing
you
up?
can, that's perfect.
So there's my folks. And so in many ways, this is so emblematic of them, because my mom is in the background. But the thing that you might see this as like, yeah, she's in the background. This is to me like very intentional. Not like they purposely like kind of frame themselves this way, but like my mom's the type to go, your dad likes to be up front. So I'm gonna let him go up there.
I can feel that in that photo.
yeah, and that he's got his full attention on the thing, and then she's kind of like that photo actually is cropped out myself and my younger sister Jennifer, and so like in a way for her, she wants to be at the spot where she can see everybody and make sure that everyone's together. Whereas for him, he's just kind of mugging for the camera. He's like, "Oh, picture time for me."
It's true. He's just got like this very like, it's like he looks like a model photo. He's just like, hey, what's up? And your mom's like,
what else can we talk about? I mean, I think that when we put these all together, there's it's interesting because what do we call this? What do we call the text part of this book? Is there like a technical word for that?
I think let's call it the text. I think that's fine.
Text. Yeah. that it tells a certain kind of story. It's sort of the narrator. It's the animals, the characters have little speech bubbles. They speak for themselves when necessary, but there is sort of this narrator that's kind of narrating along. And I just noticed that the dad one's a little thicker.
Oh,
I had them down on the counter. That's funny.
Maybe I should know the reason, but I don't. Maybe the intro's longer. I don't know.
Maybe. Well, I mean, also might be the thing that you said, which is that because there was sort of in a way more exploring to do.
Yes.
On the dad book. But I was going to say that it kind of shifts focus a little bit. It reminds me a little bit of like those nature documentaries, and sort of because there's a lot of animals that like. You'll be talking about sort of one group, and then it'll sort of shift gears and like, here's what's going on over here kind of thing. In that, in a lot of ways, it's the focus is on either the mom or the dad. And then at times the focus kind of shifts a little bit more toward the child.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes it even kind of like pulls back a little bit almost in terms of the tone to where it's a little bit more observing kind of everything happening at the same time. But there are parts of it that you've experienced yourself, talking about the loss of your mom.
Mhm.
And there are parts of it that you've experienced, like just observing and just experiencing the dads in your life, both your father as well as your husband, and such. Those There are parts that are kind of outside of both. Maybe it has to do with friends or other people you've observed and their relationships. Can you share about that part a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think in my attempt to make this as inclusive as possible, and always my attempt to make things as inclusive as possible, I really considered, because this was so, your mom was so informed by my personal experience. Your dad, I really tried to think about all the people in my life. I have a lot of really wonderful friends and different kinds of families in my life. And I was trying to think of like, well, how might it feel for this person to read this book? How might it feel for someone, who doesn't have a close, I have friends who do not have close relationships with their dad whatsoever. I have friends who have transitioned, and so they're both females. They're both, and I'm not sure. I'm like, well, I'm not actually sure, like if she goes by mother now or if she still goes by father. And I was just kind of considering all of that, and then also friends who have partners who it didn't work out and they've separated or divorced, and then they have new, parents, and everyone's co-parenting together.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really cordial. Sometimes there's animosity. There's just a lot to consider. And I had a pretty normal upbringing, and I had like a mother and a father, and I really wanted to try to like, well, that was your experience, but like, what are some other people's experiences? And so that is, I think, pretty reflective in this book. All those people in my life. And it's worth noting that like, I have one daughter and she's 7, and we don't plan on having any more kids. And a lot of people are like, well, what about siblings? Like, I can't imagine not having a sibling. And I would love to point out, I have a brother and a sister. We're extremely close. No, I cannot imagine my life without them. But that was my experience, and we don't want to have any more children. And I have other people in my life who are family to me, but they're not family of origin. They're just family that, and so that's always in the back of my mind. It's like, well, no, she doesn't have siblings, but she still has family, and family takes all different, forms. And so I think that I was doing a lot more soul searching, and hopefully that sort of comes through in this book.
It really, really does. It really does. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll go to our audience questions. Are you thinking about? I mean, I guess the main question that I had, I had a blanked out for a second. The way that you titled these books, your mom, your dad. Can you share about that? Like, you could have called it a lot of different things. Where did that kind of come from?
Well, I mean, again, it really started with the your mom joke, and I really wish that wasn't the reason, but it's the reason. I mean, that's how it started. I started with, I'm a comic artist, and it's always my most natural form is of a 2-panel comic artist, and I thought of a pun, like I thought, oh, it's funny, and then it just kind of turned into something much more meaningful than it originally was supposed to be, and then it just kind of stuck, and now it's sort of, that's just kind of what it is now. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
I didn't mean for this, but it does so much. I mean, the Your Korean Dad thing for me, it's kind of like that too, a little bit. How you kind of just have this notion, but then as you think about it more, all of a sudden, like all this meaning kind of floods in, like a tank of water just kind of flooding in. And yeah, for me, the idea, like, I could have just been a dad or just myself, Nick Cho. But like, not only did I offer myself as a dad, but like your dad, your Korean dad, and the Korean part as well. Like each one of those things kind of has a certain amount of meaning. But out of that, the most important being, we share that, like the your part.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Personal. That it makes it personal. It's like, I feel like you and I both like try really hard to connect with anyone who's like gracious enough to consume our work. It's like if trying to have that connection across the page, across the screen. So yeah, that is an interesting thing to point out.
Making people feel things is like a superpower. in so many ways. And, hopefully it's feeling good things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. What a lovely note to end your conversation on. It's so hard to stop the pair of you because there's a genuineness that comes from your conversation, and we're just a bunch of us are just sitting back here like, oh, this is great. It's true. So thank you both for that.
Thank you.
So just to let everybody know, we're going to be doing a Q&A with the audience, and some of you have already been very active in the chat, so thank you for that. And so those are where you want to ask any of your questions, one of which is very interesting. I love that you made this book so inclusive. Do you have any thoughts about maybe a third book for non-binary parents?
It's a really good question. And yes, honestly, the next sort of place I want to go is sort of just like a book about the individual. So like, instead of like, so that's sort of like what I'm thinking of next. So not necessarily like, here's your role, mom, dad, but it's more just like, this is just kind of a book for like the individual. But that is a really interesting thing to think about. I would have to make sure I talk to all the right people, because I don't want to like be the voice first. I'm just like, a cis woman. And so I want to make sure that like the appropriate voices would come through. But yeah, that is my next step, is sort of like, it is something I thought about more and more with your dad. It's like, what I've said the things that I wanted to say. I feel like I've achieved what I wanted with those. And now let's kind of move into like just the person, like so it's broader, I guess, but
You're me?
Yeah.
Your You was one of the ones that someone in the chat said was Your You, and it's a book about a child or a baby animal figuring out who they are, was one that they had.
Well, that person needs to write it, because that's a really good idea. I can't take that idea. That's brilliant. I love that.
I do feel like in a lot of ways, I have actually quite a few non-binary, non-gender conforming folks in my life. And I feel like, there is the fact that these do have kind of gendered titles of sorts. But the fact is that everything in these two books, there's parts that, like if any reader, there are parts that you can relate to. And every reader has parts they're not going to relate to directly. And in that way, like, I feel like, it's unfortunate, obviously, that we have these constraints about gender binary and such. But, I just want to say, like, I encourage folks to pick it up. I think that it does have a lot to offer for everyone.
Thank you.
I think so too. Just so you know, Liz, that Michael, who made the original suggestion, said, "It's all yours, Liz. Take your you and run with it." Smiley face.
Michael.
And then someone else said another one is your family, and talking about that extended family that you have that is not just necessarily your biological parents or those who are blood related to you. So you're getting lots of ideas. You got. I
didn't realize there would be gifts. People are bringing gifts. All right, this is amazing.
So this one I think is a really great question for the pair of you. I know every dad is different, but to you, are there any qualities that feel fundamental or essential to dadness?
I think it's the thing that for me, it's the thing that I said before. It's that every dad has to choose to be a dad. And that kind of choosing, it's like a lot of relationships where there's love. That feeling of choosing and commitment and full attention, that is in many ways like the majority of the experience. It's like you could be anywhere, but you're here with me. You could be talking to anyone, but you're talking with me. And yeah, I think that for me, it's that choosing part.
I feel like for me, as just someone observing, like my husband, for instance, like it's more the response he gets, because like he's very hands-on, and like he does everything with my daughter, and like people will be like, wow, like he's such a hands-on dad. That's amazing. I'm like, nobody ever calls me a hands-on mom. But I am. But it's like, and he's well aware of that. Like he is also like me, like he's always trying to like better himself. And so, he gets that praise. And so I think that experience sort of like, yeah, that's sort of something that you get, I think, as a dad more so than a mom, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of your husband, Liz, they want to know, what was his reaction? Did he cry, tear up? What did he think of the book?
So I have a very strange process where he's an artist. He's a fantastic artist. He's a director of animation. So everyone's like, oh wow, you must always be like bouncing ideas off of each other, and I should be, but because my process, I have to like be in the zone and finish something. And so he didn't read it until like last week. It's been done for a while, but I don't know why. I'm so anxious about just like, I have my editor that I work with, but I don't really show a lot of other people my stuff while I'm working on it. So with your mom, he cried, and he's not much of a crier, but he was like, wow. But with your dad, he didn't cry, but he was like, he was very proud, and he really loved it. And he said, I really liked it. And I don't know if yeah, I don't know. That was his response.
That's awesome. Yeah. But what a great supportive partner. That's amazing.
Oh, yes, he's very supportive.
Yeah. So I like this question too. It's a little bit more on the fun side. How did you choose what animals you chose? And what was it like putting them in the unique situations?
That's a great question. Now I'm like flipping through the book. Honestly, just like with my comics, it's usually I'll kind of have the idea of the joke that I want to, because each page has like, most pages have like a little joke or like a heartwarming moment. It's pretty much one or the other. And so I'll think of the joke, or I wrote the text first, so I'll have like sort of parentheses, and it'll be like, this is the illustration. But I don't always choose the animal. I try to like think of the funniest way to like get the situation across basically with the animal. So really like the characters are often just informed by the joke, which might not be the most exciting answer, but it is the truth. The one exception is the bear. Whenever the bear shows up in any of my work, it's always me. So it's always like, I must just relate to either that, like whatever that bear is doing. And so that's why I'm like, I got to put the bear here. That's me. I think it's on the last page of this book, which I won't show, but.
Well, which is funny that you mentioned the bears, because John mentions, Liz, I like the bear on your shelf behind you on the table on the wall.
Uh-huh.
And Nick, I like the bear on your shirt. So there are people, they're noticing.
They're everywhere.
They are.
Liz, we're here to talk about your book, obviously. There is one quick question for Nick. It might not be that quick, but Nick, as a fellow Asian dad, I'm curious on your opinion on the intersection between our Asianness and our dadness.
Yeah, our Asianness and our dadness. I mean, I grapple with the Asian part to start out with, just because Asia is such a big place that sometimes when we talk about it as if it's like one place, it's kind of silly. But I understand the question. I think that in a lot of ways, and this is corny, but I'll just say it anyway. In a lot of ways, like the best of what kind of America represents is an opportunity to define yourself, and having your roots in your culture, but ultimately your head is where you choose to put it, where depending on the amount of privilege and power that you have and opportunity. But so in that way, I don't know, like I can't help but sort of focus on that side of things.
No, thank you. And I know the viewers will be very excited about that too. Liz, changing topics here, but going back to your cartooning, how did you discover that you wanted to be an artist, and what drew you to cartoons specifically?
So I've been drawing ever since I was little. My grandmother was actually a children's book author. Her mother and sister were children's book illustrators. So there was no like, I don't know, like passing of the torch or necessarily, but like I grew up very privileged in the sense that it was an option. Like everyone in my family encouraged me and said like, you can be an artist. And so there was never any doubt in my mind. And that's something that I've like realized as I'm older. I'm like, wow, that's a very special thing. Like not everyone gets that. So I'm very, very fortunate in that sense. But I was I was surrounded by artists and writers, but I just liked to draw when I was little. And I would actually go over to her house and all the adults would sit and talk. And they always had a Far Side calendar, like a desk calendar. And so I would just sit, flip the pages, front to back. And I would just read Far Side, Calvin and Hobbes. They had like little Edward Gorey books, the Gashley Crumb Tinies. Like they had a lot of like New Yorker magazines, like stuff like that. And so I just really loved comics and wanted to try to be funny and make people laugh. And I actually like kind of got away from it for a little while, because animation and illustration are very different. And when I worked on The Simpsons, I was doing more, obviously, only animation stuff. And then I just kind of like eventually found my way back to comics, which has just always been a much more natural fit for me. So.
No, that's wonderful to hear. But speaking along the lines of comics, and Nick, I think you can chime on this too, but like, what are some artists that inspire you or that you enjoy to read on a regular basis? This is both for Liz and Nick.
Oh, we're like.
So Liz, who has inspired you? We'll start there. And who do you like to read on a regular basis?
So aside from The Far Side, which was a big inspiration, I like Shel Silverstein books a lot. Like, I mean, everyone loves isn't that weird that I like Shel? But I liked the simple drawings. As you can see with my work, I do simple drawings, and I just liked. I mean, his stuff was very expressive and super incredible. But yeah, I just liked seeing how much somebody could say with very little. And so yeah, that was probably my biggest inspiration, I'd say.
Nick, do you have anyone that you want to add to the list? Or
I don't know if I have any like one, but the one that comes to mind is Liz Climo. I mean, for me,
I just did a spit.
Yeah, I timed that.
Bad timing, perfectly. Nick. Bad timing.
I mean, the fact is that for me, what's always so striking, and anyone who who's followed her work, is just the ways that just feelings come gushing out of you through her work, your work. Let's talk about her like she's not here. Through her work, if anyone's ever seen it, I don't know if you've seen it before. I've seen it, yeah, just the way that it
too. She's got a couple, so
yeah, that just brings a lot of feelings out just through 2 quick panels. And in that way, when you look at the artwork, it just is so like it's so perfect. It just captures a certain kind of tone and a mood and the characters, and you just can just see so much there through relatively little, like, few lines. Yeah, just it's a lot. It's disproportionate. I can't think of anyone else who is able to make me feel so much with just
I would second that.
Yeah.
Hardcore.
That's so nice. Thank you.
You said it better than I could have. This is a really great one for creators as well. And Liz, I'll start with you again. It's what advice do you have for creators and artists trying to find their own voice?
So I was actually just thinking about this while you were talking, Nick, like, because when I started doing comics, I was working on The Simpsons, and I was working with so many incredible, like, well-trained, college-educated artists who went to these like fancy schools and just are just some of the most incredible artists out there. And it made me not want to draw my own stuff. And I didn't draw my own stuff for years and years. I took a 10-year break from trying to draw my own stuff for that reason, because I was just embarrassed by my work, honestly, if I'm being honest. But eventually I just sort of embraced what I did well, and it wasn't what they were doing. And I can't do what they were doing. I can't even begin to do what they were doing or are doing. So I guess my advice is just like, find the thing that you do and that you like. I guess it's sort of like a reflection of like, just learn to love that part of yourself, even if it doesn't look like what other people are doing. It doesn't, because it's you, and just kind of lean into that. And it's not gonna always get the best response. Mine certainly, I was rejected from tons of different things, but I eventually just kind of embraced that part of myself. And I think that it's like one of the most important things you can do, because you don't want to do what everyone else is doing. You want to do what you're doing. And it might not look, yeah.
Definitely. Absolutely. I know that for myself as a content creator, it's something, and this is sort of very Korean dad-esque, but there are certain kind of more difficult topics about this than what people tend to talk about. And the fact is that people do have varying levels of creativity in them, and to some degree varying levels of talent. A lot of times it feels like if we don't have like the talent of Liz Climo, then it's just like, we're and you want to be that kind of artist, that you're just a big failure. And in so many ways, it's just like, it's so terrible to see and so hard to see people kind of beating themselves up in that way. It's almost like you almost picture someone like looking at a bird and going like, I want to fly. And then I can't, and then you realize I can't fly, and then being so upset about it. That in so many ways, I think that people do have different gifts, and that tapping into those is important. But it's a thing that no one talks about, but I feel like is important, which is that certain degree of self-awareness, especially as it pertains to how, the kind of work that you do want to do, how it makes other people feel, because ultimately that's going to determine whether it's a vocation or not.
Wonderful. This is wonderful advice. Oh, crud. So I have like 2.5 more questions here, because I don't think I can get away with this one without asking this one here. What animal, Liz, would you use to represent Nick?
Oh.
Wow.
No pressure.
No, I know. For some reason, the alligator's coming to mind.
Alligators is my favorite.
Is that right?
Shut up!
The alligator in my books in my comics is often like, it's similar to the bear.
Yes.
But just a little sharper than the bear is like, the alligator's like got that same sort of sensibility often in the comics, but is also sharp, and the bear's often not as sharp. So
no, that's great. I couldn't let this whole event pass without asking that one. But the last 2 questions here, this one's really great. For both guests, as a teacher, I often find myself driven by the quote, "Be the adult you needed as a child." Do you have a quote or piece of motivation that drives you?
I don't know who said this. I should. It's famous, I think. But comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes.
That's always one that kind of stands out in my mind, because again, it was like, that was what held me back for so long, is I was like, I want to like list off all the people, there's too many to name, but it's like all these artists that I was working with, I'm not them, but like, it's okay. I'm me. And I don't like, the joy comes from being you.
Well, and that's what Nick was talking about too, when finding his own voice and stuff. So I think that's a perfect quote for that. Nick, do you have one?
It's not a quote. It's something that I've said, and it's not a very quotable thing, but I'll say it anyway, which is that, the next best thing to, having the person that you need in your life, the next best thing to having them is to be that for somebody else. It's a lot like the teacher's thing. To me, that's been in a lot of ways define a lot of my parenting, as well as how I have 20 employees in my coffee company. And a lot of the ways that I kind of approach being an employer and a boss is informed by that as well. The boss that I wish I had, that's what I try to be.
Excellent.
Yeah.
The last question that we like to ask here at Tattered Cover is one for both of you. And I want to start with Nick as a reader, and then Liz, you as the writer and illustrator. But what did this book, your dad, teach you? So Nick, I'd love it if you could start, and we'll end with our author of the hour here.
And I think, Liz would agree, what it really taught me, and I would say like more accurately, it reminded me of, is that these roles are very complicated. The topic of these is very complicated. And in a lot of ways, I was reading it and thinking to myself, not all the things that it was missing, but just in terms of all the other sort of dimensions of the idea of being a dad and that dad experience. But then immediately followed up with a realization that like, you can't capture all of it. It's sort of like a fishing net. Like you're going to do the best that you can in terms of capturing it all in one. And, obviously Liz has done a fantastic job here, just in terms of being able to kind of bring those feelings and thoughts out. And that in turn, really every other page, you could just kind of stop and reflect on it, for hours really. And it's super special. It's such a gift, Liz. Thank
you so much. That's so nice. I guess I'll just say again that, I'm really proud of it. It sort of taught me, because I often, when I'll make a book, I'll be like, oh gosh, what's this going to look like 20 years from now, 30 years from now? Like what mistakes have I made? But it taught me, I'm always going to make mistakes. I'm never going to get it. There's always going to be times when you might not get things right. Again, I'm very proud of it, but I also learned that like, as long as you're open to just learning and growing, then I think you're taking the right step. And that's sort of what it's taught me about myself. Because I don't like making mistakes. I always want to get it right the first time, but I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Just keep learning. Keep your eyes open.
I think this has been a masterclass in creation and creativity in whatever form or whatever size that takes in our lives. So thank you both for your candor, your kindness, your genuineness, not a word, but I'm making it one. I want to give
Works.
each of you a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else that you want to say before we end. And Nick, again, I'll have you start, and we'll end with Liz as we are celebrating her book, Your Dad.
I'm Nick Cho. I'm known as Your Korean Dad out there on TikTok and other places. I'll have a YouTube channel coming out in a few weeks. And yeah, that's me. Finger heart.
I love that so much. I'm Liz Climo. I have a website, thelittleworldofliz.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Liz Climo, and then on Twitter at ELCLIMO, because Liz Climo was taken.
Well, and you can get copies of Your Dad at tatteredcover.com. Some of you have already ordered them through the free registration. You added on an extra book. Thank you for supporting your local independent bookstore. Those will be mailed out to you tomorrow. Yay, we're celebrating Your Dad, which is very, very exciting. And you can get that and your mom, which, by the way, Mother's Day is very, very coming up soon. So you can get your mom and Your Dad at tatteredcover.com. If you two will stick around while I close this out here. Thank you all again. I'm McKaylee with Tattered Cover Bookstore, and this has been Celebrating Your Dad by Liz Climo. Stay safe, everybody, and happy reading.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.